Hi, and welcome to another video on object-oriented programming in C#. With me, Marinas Toman. Okay, so just a small quick video on the static modifier keyword. So as you can see, we've been using static already in our main method. Our main method is static. So what does static mean? So now that we've kind of done a bit on classes and objects, so we know a class is basically a blueprint for an object, and then an object is an instance of a class, a specific instance of a class. So where a class might be car, our specific object would be Ford, for example. So the static, whenever we were looking at classes and we created an object, we could have, so one of the good things is encapsulation, and what we could do is have many fields in there, you know, that are encapsulated. And basically whenever an object is created of the class, every object will get their own copy of them fields. So they basically just take a copy of everything, and then they can, you know, populate their own fields. So in our previous example, you know, we've seen different types of cars, and they had different model names and different model years, and different things like that. But the static keyword is different. It actually is a way that you can stop that from happening. So what you can do is you can have a field that is just the same in every object. So the objects don't get their own copy of this field. And one of the, you know, you'll often hear the static keyword being called the class keyword. So what it does is it makes a member, if a member is static, then it is a member of the class. It's not available for the objects. So we'll go through, and hopefully this will, looking at an example, will maybe make a bit more sense. So using the static modifier to declare a static member which belongs to the type itself rather than the specific object. So it's whenever an object gets created, everybody gets a copy of all of the members in the class. So that's your fields, your methods, your constructors. But if the static keyword is used, there's only one copy of that, and that belongs to the class. Okay, the objects don't get a copy of that. So that's kind of why people call it the class keyword. So when you see a static method, people, you know, you'll hear the terminology, that's a class method. That just means it has a static keyword, so the objects don't get a copy of that. The class itself keeps that copy. The objects get access to see it, but they don't get their own copy of it that they can use. So the static modifier can't be used with indexers or finalizers. So there's a couple of things, you know, that we can't use the static keyword with. But let's just look at an example now. So let's say this is your static class. So once a class is declared static, it can only have static methods in it. Okay, that's one of the things that you have to remember. Another example would be a constant type or declaration that's implicitly a static member. A static member can't be referenced through an instance. So like I said, an instance being an object. So let's go down to this example here where we can talk about it a little bit more. So you can see that we have an add employee here. That's a static method, and we have a static int as well. So with this, whenever there's basically a new object of this class employee 4 created, so let's say, you know, there's our default constructor. This is an implemented user defined constructor. what we need to do, or when this is created here, so when this constructor is called, every object will get its own ID, will get its own name, so they get their own variables for that, but they don't get an employee counter. That belongs to the class itself. So you can see here, you know, what's the employee's ID, enter the current address, number of new employees. So basically this would be a way, in this instance what it's just doing is counting the number of employees we have. So every time I call this add employee, it's just going to increment this counter by 1 and return that. So another key thing to remember about static is that static variables can only be accessed by static methods. Okay, so basically class methods can only access class variables, if you want to think about it like that. And then this is the, you know, the object variables and methods. Okay, so the static keyword, let's say you were initializing, you know, you wanted to, it's really good for things like this. Let's say, you know, you had an employee's ID and you wanted it to always be unique. What you could do is you could declare a static variable called ID, employee ID, and then every time there's a new employee created with their own, you know, they would have their own field called ID, and then you could say ID equals employee ID and then, you know, increment it after. So every time a new ID is assigned to employee, it's going to be different, and this, you know, counter would belong to the class. So it's basically a way of keeping tracks. It's also, you know, like this here example is a good way of keeping track of how many times have I called this class, how many objects of this class have I created. So there's times when we might need to use the static keyword, and just for more, you know, information on it, just come over to Microsoft themselves, you know, and always try and stick with their own documentation and, you know, the language specification and all that. Okay, so that's everything for the video. Thanks for watching.